they're the issue.
Right.
But they're funded by us.
Right.
We're
right.
the reason they exist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, we have to be a part of the solution so that we can have people stay where they want to live with their families, in their homes. Like why the hell would you want to come here?
Right.
If you're living in paradise,
Right.
That
is to me, like the driving home point that people don't realize. They're not coming here because they want to have to learn a new language and like give up their trade and learn some menial job that they can only get because they don't speak the language. You know what I mean? Like They're not coming here for that. They're coming because it's so dire where they're from that they have no choice if they want to survive. What up? It's Dramos, and this is the recap, of course, as I do each and every week, breaking down some of the biggest headlines from this last week. My guest this week helping me do so is an incredible R&B singer, goes by the name of Flores, so she'll be hopping on in just a little bit. But before that, I want to tackle something on the lighter side. I know you're probably saying, man, 2 weeks in a row, we're not getting into the BS. Well, I've been in a good mood, so that's a part of it. But also, I know Flores is a huge advocate when it comes to things like immigration. So I know we're going to get into a bunch of that. So I want to start off on a bit of a lighter note in an area that, man, I am incredibly passionate about. Now, I do a ton of different things when it comes to media, hosting, podcasting, all of the above. But at the end of the day, my heart is always going to be a musician, always going to be a DJ. And no matter how far away from it I get in a professional sense, I always love to follow what's going on in music, and especially Latin music and all the things that have been happening with that. We've been breaking so much ground. I mean, people like Bad Bunny have carried the torch that someone like a Daddy Yankee left behind, and made us and our music a part of the national conversation here in this country on platforms and radio stations and outlets that aren't just, Spanish speaking. And we're seeing that lead into this trend that has changed, what I think to be kind of a really disappointing part of our history, right? When you talk about, traditionally speaking, many Latin artists, in order to cross over and find success here in the States, they had to start singing music in English, right? You talk about somebody like a Mark Anthony who had to do an English version of his album to begin getting radio play. And listen, it was a part of the times, but I am incredibly, moved and motivated to kind of see this other transition happening where American artists are now having to basically come to our house and speak Spanish and learn Spanish in order to get on our music. And you could say things like that kind of started when it came to Drake and Bad Bunny collaborating, or Luis Fonsi and Justin Bieber. But now it's becoming a very, very regular thing. And I just thought it was something that needed to be highlighted because it's a really beautiful moment for our culture to see how far we've really come. I mean, you talk about, somebody like The Weeknd, one of the biggest artists in the entire world, deciding to sing in Spanish with Rosalia, right? Or now this new release that J Balvin has had. And obviously there are some issues maybe with J Balvin, but at the same time, you have to give it up where credit's due, because he did a song, or two songs I should say, with Ed Sheeran, right? And Ed Sheeran singing some Spanglish, man, like saying some Spanish. And then the last thing that I saw that was really moving to me recently was Coldplay when they were playing in the Dominican Republic, and they sang a song in Spanish. They covered a song called Bachata Rose in the Dominican Republic. And I bring all this up as inspiration and to pass along those good vibes of knowing, man, that our time is now, right? We have a seat at the table. People are having to come to us instead of the other way around. And I just think that's something to be celebrated and something for us to recognize the growth of our culture and the movement that we are at the front of right now. And man, it's just a beautiful time to be a Latino in this country. And listen, I'm gonna get into many ways where it's still a bit problematic to be a Latino in this country. We're going to get into that with my guest, but you also have to celebrate the little wins along the way. And I'm just so happy to see the inclusion that we are viewing right now in modern music. And obviously, I think radio stations needs to play a little bit of catch up, but to see people like Ed Sheeran and The Weeknd in the prime of their career coming and wanting to show us the respect of being traditional and being a part of our culture for this moment, I think is a beautiful thing. And it's a telling sign of the opportunities that can possibly lie ahead for our culture. Now, with that said, we are going to dive into a bunch of, really important topics, because my guest is not just an incredible singer, not just an incredible artist, but also somebody who I would consider to be an advocate. She is somebody who is out there fighting, protesting, using her music to speak out against what she believes in. She is someone of Mexican descent who is very vocal about immigration and the terrible policies that we see in this country. So I want to dive into a bunch of that. Her name is Flores. Her latest single, Exito, is available everywhere right now. Hey, Flores, how you feeling?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me again. Pleasure, always.
Of course. Yeah, we had you on the podcast. Now we got you on the TV show. I'm excited to have you on because I felt like we had a really dope conversation, about, your culture specifically, right? When it comes to being someone of Mexican descent, and there's always so much to talk about that. And the news right now is no different than when we spoke a few months ago. Actually, there's a bit more controversy. So I do want to kind of get your take on things that pertain to that, as well as a few other things, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, perfect.
All right. So, we'll get to that. Let's start maybe just a little bit lighter, and we'll talk about this story that came from Disney. Now, you have this woman, Tori Canela, who violated apparently the dress code in Disney. She was stopped by one of the Disney personnel and told that she violated the dress code, and they made her go and get a Disney t-shirt to change and put that on. Now, there's some backlash because she was wearing a crop top, right? It wasn't like some crazy outfit. It was a crop top that happened to be like tied together in the front or whatever it was, but nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary. But it kind of lends itself, I feel like, and at the risk of sounding too woke, but this sort of sexualization of women that we see over and over again, right? And then it's kind of just said to be, they're doing something inappropriate when they're just being them, right? When they're just essentially being women and dressing as women do. So, I don't know if you've seen the pictures or anything like that, but generally speaking, when you hear about stories like this and when we talk about especially women of color, specifically Black and brown women, they're told, that things that they do are too sexy, or they're often viewed and sexualized at early ages. So let's talk a bit about your own thoughts and experiences when you hear things like this. What does it kind of bring up for you?
Oh man, I haven't heard of this story, but that's a really great topic. But it reminds me of something with like Nicki Minaj for her Anaconda video. She had like the picture of it was like her in a thong, but Taylor Swift was also in a thong.
Right.
And it was like, but they demonized her because she's very voluptuous versus Taylor Swift, who isn't as voluptuous.
Sure.
And how they depict us in a certain way. So I do really see that. But I didn't see what she was wearing. But I really don't think you should police people on what they're wearing. It's a free country. We should be able to wear what we want.
Right.
And if you're offended, look away. Like, like we're all human beings. We all have the same stuff. So I'm like, I didn't even know Disney had a dress code. I think that's crazy.
Apparently this is a thing. Like they have security who polices these kinds of things. And obviously, you have people who take their jobs a bit too seriously at times in any field, right? Whether it's like security or anything, anybody who gets put in a position of power, there's often stories like that. But I think that's a great point to bring up, like the Nicki Minaj versus Taylor Swift thing, because it's almost like women are being punished for being born with, a voluptuous body, which happens to be, a general stereotype of certain, body types when it comes to being Latin or being, African American, different things like that, and it's almost like as women, you're like punished for it. And I'll be completely honest. I'm keen to it a bit more now, but as a man, it's not something that I grew up kind of realizing, you know what I mean? That is something that we're doing or that we're taught, I'd imagine even being in the music industry, it has to be a bit of a tough balance for yourself of like, what's going to be considered you trying to like, put out your sexiness to get views and things like that, I'd assume.
Yeah. I try to stay away from all that. I think that a lot of girls you got to do what you got to do. So I don't judge anybody, but I think for myself, like, I feel like if I was to act like this, it would just distract from the message of what I'm trying to talk about. Right. So I don't try to go down that way. I'm also a grown ass woman. So I'm like, should I be doing this? I don't know,
No, yeah.
So, but I get it. Like I get the pressures for women to be sexy all the time. And also that it gets like younger and younger that they start to sexualize women. But particularly for women who develop earlier, I really feel for that, because it's not only that you get it all on the street, but like, at school with teachers, or, I think it's really tough for women, especially women of color, because it's not just that they're voluptuous, it's that they're respected less as well. Even within our own community of men, we're disrespected more so. So it's a really sad situation. So that's really sad for her.
I think it's like it's almost like the men have to kind of have the finger pointed back at them as to why these sort of notions have been created. Like I can't think of a time where a man like got in trouble for having print in like a pair of tight pants. Like you saw his privates, like the shape of it, right, his junk. It's like celebrated. You know what I mean? Like when Pitbull, like there was that pic of him like with his tight ass pants that he wears, and like that's like this celebrated thing. I can't imagine being in an office building and having to be sit down by my boss like, hey, your pants are really distracting people because of your print is showing. You know what I mean? But like the sad thing is that this is like a common occurrence when it comes to women. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's also, I've heard from people in my own life that it's also this common fear that you have. Like, am I going to be taken seriously if I don't kind of try to dress, overly conservative just for that, and I imagine it's got to be exhausting to have these extra thoughts when you're just trying to live your life, essentially.
Yeah, I think it's exhausting just to be a woman. Like just like, oh, we have to do so much to just look good. And I'm like, men just show up. That's it. They wake up and show up, and that's it. So I do think it's like the structure of patriarchy. It's the men and then the women who uphold it. Right. Because, there's a lot of women, like if I were to wear something scandalous in my formative years, you get more like really mean, like mad dogging older women who are looking at you like, how dare you disrespect God, like this.
Right. Especially in our community that's very conservative,
I mean, they say they're conservative, but I think they're not on the deal. They're not. No.
What do you mean by that?
I feel like there's always some drama in our families, like my grandfather had 2 women in his life, that he had a love affair with. That's not, and he got buried next to them. He's buried in the middle of his mistress and his wife. Wow. And it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, we have to just accept it, because it's like, well, he was a good man. He put bread on the table. So, you got to accept for his, and I don't think that's conservative. I think, and that's normal,
Right. Well, that even is like, when you talk about the idea of like a patriarchy, that's also like, well, he's the man, so you can't really question too much what he's doing. You know what I mean? And I think, to your point, there is a hell of a lot of hypocrisy that happens within our community, about, they police certain things, but other things they're okay with kind of turning a blind eye to,
Yeah. Yeah. They're like, I know I've heard some women who are like older women, so our abuelas are like, at least he didn't beat me. And I'm like, well, but he talks to you like,
yeah.
So it's a really weird, like, there's a real weird space for us, I think, as women of color and women of marginalized communities where we sit, because it's a lot of battles we have to fight. Right. So it's I can only speak for my community, but I feel like that Latin men or Latino men, however they identify, should build or uplift our women. I feel like they just don't do that in our community. It's not normal.
Like generational kind of trauma and a lot of like things that have been passed down that no longer serve us, ideals that no longer serve us, right? I talk about that kind of thing a lot in my content. It's kind of like we have to unlearn a lot of the nonsense that we've been taught, because it just doesn't serve us anymore. You know what I mean? Like in America,
the idea of just one person being the one that brings in the income and controls like the household in that way, like it doesn't make sense anymore, right? Like people aren't getting paid enough money to survive like that anymore. So like, even if you aren't involved enough to have this conversation from a moral compass standpoint, like practically speaking, it doesn't make any sense for like the man to have to be the breadwinner and like him just because he wants to be in control. Like none of this kind of makes sense, and we have to do a better job of kind of unlearning a lot of that.
I totally agree. And I think it's a lot on men, like just to have to be, and then you have to be emotionally supportive. And now the game has changed. Now you've got to be all these things. And I'm like, that's a lot for guys. Like, and then have to pay for everything. It's like, I can pay for myself.
Right.
I can buy my own groceries. I pay my own rent. It's those sorts of things. It's like, I think I think in this era, particularly, there's been like a rise of Kevin Samuels, like the sort of like male podcaster, like, and you're just like, what are there men who really think like this? Like high value women, high value men, that's
yeah, guys, like I don't understand like the audience for somebody like him. You're bringing up somebody who literally just like irks at my last nerve, because it just is so like idiotic, the things that he talks about, and anybody that's not familiar, he just has like this male superiority complex and is like really good at wanting to tell women how they should be acting in his own eyes, to like basically be subservient to a man, and shaming women in so many ways. Like women will ask for advice and he just shames them essentially.
He's super mean. I'm like, girl, why did you call him? Like,
but that's like,
he's got like 1 million followers, so it's like people, but that's men like him.
Yeah, men like him, but then obviously there's also a sector of women who still somewhere in the back of their mind believe that this type of behavior is okay, right? Because there still is a level of like trauma that they're dealing with, that this is how they were brought up, and they're just continuing on this really terrible kind of notion of devaluing themselves as well.
Absolutely. And it's so deeply cultural, deeply embedded in us, but that's going to take a long time to get out of our systems, is the way I see it.
Yeah.
Even for myself, I have toxic masculinity traits where I'm like, a man should be able to fix a car and fix the plumbing, and like my brothers and my dad, you know what I mean? And I'm just, I have to check myself sometimes in my relationship, because I'm like, modern men don't know how to do that. They don't, and they shouldn't have to. It's I should do it. I should try to do it. That's the way I see it. So it's like, we're trying to break it.
Right. And it's really difficult, but that level of self-awareness is where it starts, right? Because these things are so deep-rooted, we can't expect to change overnight. But that self-awareness is the start. And then moving on to something that I know is really close to your heart, talking about immigration, right? And the border, when it comes to Mexico. I mean, we've had some news there recently as Biden has announced that effective May 23rd, they're going to end the Trump era policy of Title 42. And for anybody not familiar, that prevented people who are seeking refuge from dangerous or harmful conditions from applying for asylum in the United States. Now, this is getting, kind of, as you could have predicted, backlash from Republicans. And then it's also now allowing them to use this as leverage to fight back against Biden trying to have a COVID relief bill to get more money for testing and things like that. But the scary thing to me, kind of all this is to be expected to a degree, right? When you're talking about the pushback from Republicans, and you would hope that Biden would understand that, something like this is incredibly terrible. But there was a poll done, and they were saying that the majority of registered voters in this country, 56%, actually oppose Biden from removing this Trump era policy. I mean, so it's no surprise when we live in America, but it still is shocking to think that more than half the country doesn't believe that these people's lives are worthy of being saved, essentially. I mean, as somebody of Mexican descent, you've protested, you sing about this type of stuff in your music. I mean, how does things like this make you feel?
I mean, I'm not surprised. I think there's like a mentality, especially like I was in an Uber, I'm in LA right now, and I was in an Uber, and like there was a young Filipino man who was driving me, who was talking about immigration. Right. And he was like, there isn't enough space for us. There isn't enough space for like, it's really packed in here. We can't have more immigrants coming into this country. And I'm like, no, America's really big, right? Like, there's enough space for us. Like, it might not seem like that because everybody's fighting for land here in LA, but like, there's a perception, I think, especially among immigrants or new immigrants, first gens, that think that there's not enough space for us. Like, I have to hold this and I can't let new people come in.
Yeah.
And I feel like once they are the deciding vote, they also contribute to then the Republican side and sometimes even become conservative as a result.
Sure.
And I suppose the media contributes to the idea that there isn't enough for all of us, but there is. Like, there are places in Montana and Idaho and Ohio. It's like, there's plenty space for all of us. It's just, if people believe that there is this, and I think this is historical, the idea of the outsider.
Right.
We can't let them in. They'll bring disease. They'll bring crime will go up as a result. It's the same narrative for like hundreds of years, like all over the world. Like, well, do people just get a clue? Like, they're selling you the juice. Don't drink it.
Right. Well, people don't though. That's the scary part. Like, literally history is just repeating itself over and over and over again, even down to what we saw with COVID and people fighting against it happened when the Spanish flu happened, right? And then even this notion of there not being enough room. I mean, we've heard that argument when it came to Puerto Ricans, and like when they were sterilizing Puerto Ricans on the island, that there's too many for that area, when that was just a lie. It's like these same talking points keep happening over and over again. And the reality is, just a vast majority of this country is uneducated in that and believes everything that they hear on TV. They don't understand that people are lying to you, that they don't actually have your best interest in mind.
And I think in the denser cities, it seems like it's cramped, but that's by design. That's like, they pushed all the poor people out, gentrified the area. So it's like, well, of course. And of course you don't want, if it's a predominantly white area, like I'm currently staying in a very predominantly white, affluent area.
Yeah.
And I could see how they wouldn't want like an influx of Mexican people unless they're working on their yard or cleaning their pool or something. But that's the only Mexicans that I see in this area are the people who are working. Right. And it's bizarre for me because I'm Mexican and I'm just like, man, this is up. It's messing with my head at the moment, but like, but I get it. And I think that people are just going to have to eat it on this one. They're just going to have to, because you are entitled by the Constitution to come here and claim asylum. Right. That is their right. And ending that was like, just during COVID was, I don't even, because, my mom works at a shelter and there's actually a woman who I spoke to yesterday she's from Sudan. Yeah. And she's stuck in the shelter trying to just get an ID so she can see her kids. She's been separated from them for 8 years.
Wow.
And she's from Norway. Wow. So she has a Norwegian passport, but because she's Black, it looks super fishy and she can't travel through Texas. We can't drive her there because they have an immigration checkpoint where they ask you if you're American or not.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find a way like how we can get her ID. Yeah. Maybe she comes to California so that way she can go see her kids, get with the consulate and hopefully get her ability to stay here legally. But she's been here undocumented for 11 years.
Wow.
And it's like, I'm like, she needs to claim asylum. She has the right to claim asylum, but she can't. So it's just been a very, very like, these are people's lives we're playing with and all they want is a better life, like us all.
Right.
And we're the ones who are causing these mass migrations. So it's like, I think people are mostly ignorant. So it doesn't surprise me that so many people are against something like this. Really, I look at the border and I'm just like, it weighs on you. You're just like,
of course,
lose hope in humanity that we care about brown people. It doesn't seem like we do.
Yeah, it is hard to kind of keep the positivity and to not get angry and to want to be a contributing member to a society that doesn't seem to want to accept you as equal. I mean, you look at the way that Ukrainian refugees were welcomed with open arms, and I mean, obviously what's happening in their country is terrible. But when you look at the contrast between a place like Haiti, where terrible things were happening and they were being sent back and being unwelcomed here, when after earthquakes and after their leader was assassinated, and obviously the volatility of Latin America and Central America, these are people that are in just as much danger on a regular basis. And it shows you that the people being welcomed with open arms, we have empathy for those who are white. But when it's a brown or a black person, we can't seem to find empathy. You know, we have to make it as difficult as possible for these people to get the safety that they're seeking. You know, it's a really telling thing.
That has been a very, like, you know, with respect to the Ukrainian people, because war is always a war on children and women.
Yeah.
So it's like, there's no words for that. But when it comes to the way the media has spun this and people, empathy, I think we're just not used to seeing Caucasian European people in misery, in war. I think we're so used to seeing in Afghanistan, we're so used to seeing brown and black pain and suffering. And it's so normal that you're just like, oh, that's just the Middle East. It's always been that way. Oh, that's just the drug war in Mexico. It's always been that way. You don't bat an eye. We're so conditioned. It's the same thing with this woman, I think it was Gabby Petito, who went missing, you know, and in the same area, 700 indigenous women have gone missing. And you're like, if I go missing, no one's going to give a shit about me. There's not going to be, I'm not going to make a headline, you know, and that worries me. That worries me for my sisters and everybody in my family. It's just the sort of thing like, why is this way? I get it, obviously, in the context of history. Right. But you just ask yourself, like, when is that going to change? Because we're a big minority. Latinos are a big minority. Black people are a big minority. It's like, you know, so I don't know. I think that the government's trying to control the amount of Latinos coming from Mexico and otherwise, because we have more children on average. I think we have like 5 to 1.
Right. And the census numbers are showing like we're out here, we're coming up, to your point.
So it's like, I think that they're just really scared because Europeans are not from here. So they're, you know, having less and less children. So are Mexican Americans. So it's like the Latinos from Latin America who are coming here are going to have lots of babies, and then we'll be browning the country. And in 500 years, I believe it'll be brown again. So it's like trying to keep power is the way that I see this whole immigration.
Absolutely. But to me, even like for anybody who may not agree with immigration, I would just point you to look at what your politicians are telling you, right? Because they're using not giving out relief for COVID, which is an issue still. They're using that as leverage to try and get Biden to not do this thing, right? So they're literally telling you, we don't give a damn about your safety. All we care about is passing policies that we see fit. Like, so that to me, that should be the most telling thing, whether you agree with this or not. Like, if they're literally telling you to your face, we don't give a damn about you as human beings. It's all about putting our own plans in action and us remaining in power. That's the scary thing to me, is that people just seem to ignore that and not give a damn about that.
I think if they start to do numbers with asylum seeking, they don't want to encourage that get the word into Latin America, and then you have a larger influx because their houses are on fire. That El Salvador, what's going on there with you know, it's volatile. It's all volatile for the people. So it's like I don't blame anyone for leaving that type of crime and violence. But that to me is a war. And I always wonder, like, why isn't the government calling the narcos terrorists? I don't like to talk about narcos because we live by the border and they run everything. So I don't like to openly speak about them, but I wonder why the government's so hesitant to claim that these people are living in war conditions, the same as any. There's guns and there's murders every day. It's I tried to find it within myself to try to, like, because a few women have been murdered recently in the past couple of months in Ciudad Juarez for speaking out publicly. One was she had a radio show and she was shot dead in her car, and she's from El Paso, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like they're the issue, but they're funded by us, we're the reason they exist. So it's like, you know, we have to be a part of the solution so that we can have people stay where they want to live with their families, in their homes. Like, nobody, why the hell would you want to come here? You know, if you're living in paradise, you know,
I don't. that is the, to me, like the driving home point that people don't realize. They're not coming here because they want to have to learn a new language and like give up their trade and learn some menial job that they can only get because they don't speak the language. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
They're not coming here for that. They're coming because it's so dire where they're from that they have no choice if they want to survive, right? So the U.S., because of its terrible policies with Latin and Central America, is why there's so much turmoil, and like you said, the support that we're giving to these people who are causing the turmoil, that's why, that should be the focus, and people need to kind of realize that. Like, if you have a problem with immigration, you feel like it's getting too crowded, the answer is not, sealing off the border. That doesn't solve the problem. The answer is actually doing something in these countries that are in dire need of help that we've contributed to the problem,
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same with like agriculture. They ban, if something's contaminated in Mexico, they ban it from coming in.
Yeah.
And it's because their water's contaminated. And I'm like, well, they're growing 80% of our produce. They're keeping us fed. Shouldn't we invest in their watering systems, cleaning them for them? You know what I mean? It's like, we shouldn't put extra tariffs and making it harder for them to run their operation. We could be helping them get better water systems. It's like, we could create an economy for all of us, something that works for everyone, because we're all part of the Americas. But America doesn't want that. America does not want a union, does not want a unified South America. It doesn't want it. It really doesn't want that, because that would be too powerful. That would be like an EU. That could be scary. Very scary.
It is sadly always about power at the end of the day for these people, these career politicians. Now, we talked about a lot of really heavy stuff. I want to touch on something that is positive. I actually saw you repost this on your Instagram, and it was in Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, New York. That was the first one to unionize. So you had Christian Smalls and Derek Palmer. They're the guys leading that organizing, and it made history as the first Amazon warehouse where the majority voted to form a union. And they're fighting, obviously, for employee benefits and advocating for better working conditions, pay, all of the above that we've heard. I mean, for you, why was that so compelling that you felt like you had to share that news?
I mean, the odds they're up against.
Yeah.
These are like, I mean, you really have to know, you really have to be working class to know this. Like, you really do. Like, I've been working at, like, I've worked in warehouses. I've worked as a waitress. I've worked at H&M and these, like, but living in Europe, at least in Norway where I live, I'm unionized. But in America, especially in Texas, you sign an agreement that's called at will. So they can fire you at will. And they say you have the right to talk about a union, but if you get caught talking about a union, they'll fire you, and they'll just be like, well, it's an at will. I can fire you for whatever reason. So you're terrified. You don't want to start talking about it. And it's, and this is like, gosh, there was like, I don't know if you remember this Oscar Mayer. People tried to, the workers, they're undocumented workers working for Oscar Mayer. And like, I think it was like, I don't know if it was somewhere in the South.
Okay.
And they were trying to unionize because of sexual harassment and other terrible things.
Yeah.
And the execs got wind, and they called DHS or immigration to pick them all up. And it was the largest immigration raid in history, in American history.
Yeah.
And then the next day they put out like a mass hiring thing so they could have more people but they literally just took the parents and left the children.
Yeah.
So it's a really big thing to have a union. Our people failed because they got caught and they were undocumented or unprotected. Yeah. So when I see like this level of a win, this is one of those moments in history that will be the wildfire. It is the Arab Spring. It will show you that you can do anything. You can be the richest man in the world. The richest man in the world. They could hire lawyers forever.
Yeah.
But they did that. And I just, I'm speechless. I really am. I'm speechless.
And I love that the president of this union, like, literally just was a New York dude. You know what I mean? Like, I loved, he was on there on TV. He had his chains. I think he had a grill in his mouth. And I was like, I love this, man. Because this dude is like literally any dude walking down the street in New York City that you could run into. And both the guys, the president and vice president, are Black. And it's incredible to see that, because like you said, that is that fire. That is that inspiration. Like, look, these are literally everyday dudes. You're not talking about people in suits. You're not talking about people who are like Ivy League educated or have a cosign from some sort of Harvard lawyer or something like that. Like, these are everyday dudes, and they managed to do it. And to your point, beating the richest man in the world essentially at his own game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There is something absolutely. There's something so beautiful and just, man, incredibly inspiring about that for sure.
It's been wild. I've been rooting for them for so long. They have terrible working conditions, and it's like, you know, we deserve a working living wage. Yeah. And now when they unionize and they show what they can get, you get $30 an hour, you get sick pay, maybe maternity leave, like the things they can get now, and job projection, like, because they can't just fire you in Norway once they hire you. They can't just do that because you're unionized. And when you're unionized, they can't work with you. Yeah. So it's like, and I saw the CEO of Starbucks coming up to his people saying like, oh, you know, there's a threat to us right now because of these unions. And I don't know how they demonize unions.
Right.
Can I cuss? I don't know if I can cuss on
this. Talk from the heart.
I was cussing, but it just it seemed like, how did we get from being unionized in the 1950s, one of the best generations, you know, to like demonizing them, where we think like, oh no, it's socialism. I don't get it. I don't.
Yeah, what I don't get is you have a guy who's like a multimillionaire or a billionaire telling you there's something threatening us, guys. It's like, what? I'm making $15 an hour. Like, our situations are vastly different. You know what I mean? Like what in what world are we in the same boat and having the same threats, right? Like, that's why the Trump thing never made sense to me either. Like, Trump is the working man's like savior. This guy never worked a day in his life. What the hell are you guys talking about? You know, like, it literally, just things like that frustrate me because it's just so much idiocracy and like people, you know, glad to see people fighting against it and realizing in situations like this, but there are so many others who get brainwashed by, you know, the people in power at their jobs. And it really is sad to see.
I think that is the saddest thing to see. And it's mostly suppression of voices, the way they've created like these really like terrible work environments, huge turnover rates. Like, capitalism is a beast. And it's just, I just feel like here in the free world, there should be unions, because that is the only way for at least working class jobs to get the kind of rights that they deserve. We all deserve them. And it's like, you are powerful if you are in numbers, you know. And I think he said that was so remarkable in his speech was that don't quit your job, you know, come together, assimilate. I was like, thank you so much for saying that, because a lot of people don't want to stick their neck out. They're like, oh, I got kids to feed, I can't lose my job, you know, or they just quit and get another one. And it's like, you don't solve anything when you back away. I'm really proud of them. They have done something historical. So it's big moment.
Big moment. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And the last thing I would say is, for anybody who's like against this and doesn't understand the importance of it, look at a company like Walmart, who has like so many of their employees are on food stamps and things like that. And if you're just a dollars and cents person, again, you're the one paying for that extra money that those employees need, right? So while the CEOs of Walmart are becoming richer and richer because they're paying their employees wages that they can't live off of, it gets kicked back to the rest of us. So that should anger you. The fact that these guys who are rich and don't have to worry about money, we're paying for part of their employees, you know, livelihood because they're cheaping out on that. Like, that should enrage you, you know, in the most way, regardless of anything else. Like, that pisses me off. You know what I mean? So I don't understand how anybody could have an issue with that. Things like that just don't make sense to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I've been through my own issues with one of my older jobs where we were trying to get unionized, and people were like, they liked to hire in this company people who were new immigrants. So they didn't know their rights. They didn't know the language very well. So because we were trying to get unionized. We didn't win because the turnover rate was so high that you then have to keep convincing the new people to unionize. And it's like, and this was in Norway, where unions are perfectly free and legal, to talk about. Actually, they will bring the spokesperson from the union to the location to talk and help recruit people. So it's really like a great free environment. But this company in particular was a Spanish company. I won't name names, but they were like really anti-union. And I'm like, well, then don't come to Norway. If you don't like it, leave.
Right,
Like,
right.
don't employ us then.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, obviously, there are always going to be people trying to take advantage of the system. That's why it's so important for everybody else to be fighting back and organizing. And like you said, there's definitely strength in numbers, and we have to realize that, you know. So I want to now get to your music quickly. I mean, there are two songs in particular that I really want to get to. I mean, let's start with the latest single, Exito. Now, I've heard you explain what it's about, and it's a really deep meaning, but I'd love to hear it in your own words for anybody who's not familiar.
I would say, like, I usually let people like try to, if it's not something that, especially love songs or success songs, songs about your like growth.
Right.
I'm like, well, what do you feel when, because I love to know.
Yeah.
But for me, it was just like, just a moment of taking really big risks. I often feel like we always let fear control our decisions and who we love, what we do, where we go. You're safe. You need to be safe. You don't want to quit your job because, you don't want to take the risk to a leap of faith on yourself. I feel like we're never betting on ourselves. So it's definitely a song about, taking the risk to love and to invest in yourself. I know it's like all these things, but at least that's what was in my heart at the time when I wrote it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's funny because I don't think we realize how love is so much a part of our life, even when you're not just talking about it in the romantic sense, right? But it should be kind of leading every decision you make, be it love for yourself, right? And making decisions that reflect that love for yourself, the love for the people around you, the love for the place that you're living, And I think that's a beautiful thing because we all have to kind of learn to overcome the tragedies that we've all experienced, right? The downs that we've all experienced, the letdowns that we've experienced, and the only way for happiness is to say, okay, all that stuff has happened, but I'm going to take another swing. I'm going to go, I'm going to go step up and get to another at bat, because this might be the time that I actually find what I'm looking for, in this particular circumstance. So that's why I kind of found was pretty profound about this song. I don't know if I'm taking it a little too far, but that's what
you're like spot on. Like spot on. You're really listening.
yeah. See, that's good. And then the last one I wanted to talk about, because this was kind of a bit different for you, the track Sangre, which was more of a like spoken word piece, which I loved. I've been super into like spoken word over the pandemic. I got into it, and it's been something I found to be really kind of moving, So, I mean, let's kind of talk a bit about that. I mean, what was the inspiration for wanting to do a spoken word track? And then also talk about kind of the meaning behind it and what you were referencing.
I mean, it was just there. I mean, I think it was 2018 that I wrote it, and I was really mad. I heard a speech by Donald Trump, and I was just really mad. I was just fuming, and I was like, let me just write this down. And I wrote it in one go, or just I said it in one, and it was just to get all that stuff out of like how you feel. I wanted it to feel suffocating because I felt suffocated. I'm far away from my family, but the crisis at the border, and the feeling that like this was obviously before the pandemic, but it was like ICE had upped its presence in El Paso at the time, and my mom had said that they came in unmarked vehicles and they had guns to people's heads because they thought that they were doing something, and I'm like, well, they're not allowed to just roll up into your home or around the area with unmarked vehicles in masks, like ski masks and guns. That's scary. That's crazy. Yeah, it's scary. And it's just another form of suppression. And I just was really mad. And I thought like everything we're seeing, it's all connected. The way that the violence on both sides, this heavy policing as a result that it's the catalyst is, we have to protect the borders from the crazy, narcos. But it's like the narcos are friends with our politicians. They work for us.
Right.
So it's like this, really weird, like who is the Joker without Batman kind of thing. That's how it felt. So that's why I wrote it, because I just wanted to get it off my chest. I wasn't sure if I'd keep it, but then like everybody that heard it was like, this is really powerful. Yeah. And I'm like, well, maybe I should keep it. So we kept it.
Right. I think there's always something so beautiful about capturing that moment in time as far as your feelings go, right? Like, because obviously a lot of those issues still stand today. I mean, there are a lot of people who still agree with the words that he spoke and things like that. But that anger that you felt, I'd imagine to a degree it subsided. It's not as intense, right? Because time has passed. But being able to look back on it when you hear that song and like you're able to kind of really capture that moment in time. It's almost like a photograph, but it's so much deeper than that. You know what I mean? It's like you're able to turn something that was so hurtful to you into like this incredible and beautiful work of art. I can only imagine like that has to be such a great feeling now looking back on it, 4 years later.
I mean, I think what makes me sad is that nothing's changed. I think that's when I look at it. I'm like, not a damn thing has changed for us, and it's all the same. Whether it's Biden or it's not, they all feel the same about us. Like, they don't care about us. So, I look at the prison systems and just like, just the way they're throwing felonies at young men of color, just like trying to make anything stick to get them in prison, and I'm like. How is this legal? How is this okay? How are we not mad as hell? How are we not marching to Washington? Like, why are we not together? Like Black and brown people, like we are so powerful. That is why that Amazon win is like, it's going to be a pivotal shift in what we can do. Because I think that Jeff Bezos is almost more powerful than the United States government. If you ask me, he's got so much money. He could buy America if he wanted to.
Right. There are people who are a lot less rich than him that have bought politicians. You know what I mean? That have politicians in their back pocket. And you're right. That is something we have to be very, very, very fearful of. And to your point, I agree. I think as Black and brown people, we should be coming together. And I want to see this even in media. You know what I mean? Like. People of color in media, don't allow these narratives to go out there. Like, do your part, because when you look at how they talk about like the opioid epidemic, like that is something that is looked at with, oh my goodness, our kids are dying on the streets and things like that. And then you look at it in contrast to how they talked about, the crack era and all these things. And it was like, they were placing all the blame on the users. But when it's opioids, because that affects, middle-class white kids the most, it's like, oh my goodness, we need to help these kids. We need to fight against these companies that are putting it out there, and we just have to wake up to that and understand that there's so much more, at stake than this sort of steady paycheck or just being happy to be in the room. You know what I mean? Like we have to start correcting some of these narratives in wherever we are, from unionizing Amazon, or if you are, somebody, like I said, in the media, you can't allow these things to go over the airwaves and to that be okay. You know what I mean? Especially now, like if you get wrongfully terminated in the media, like none of these companies want to deal with that in the press. So you have the leverage, you know what I mean? Like, we have to start calling people out and let them know, like, no, this is not okay. The stories that you're telling and the narratives that you're putting out there.
I completely agree with that. I know they would be like, oh, it's freedom of speech, but it's also like, if you have huge platform, you shouldn't be able to just, say anything. That reminds me of that massacre in Johnstown in South Africa, where it's like, well, you could make people do crazy stuff. Even if you look at Rwanda with the massacre there, it's like they were able to get on radio and then convince you to kill your neighbor. It's like, really scary stuff can come from this type of platform. People have fought me on this, like, oh, we shouldn't take Trump off Twitter, that kind of thing. I'm like,
no, I think you and I fall in the same. Listen, I agree. I'm in media. I understand freedom of speech, but when it crosses the line that it begins putting people's lives in danger, to me, that's when you have to step in and say, okay, enough is enough, right? Like we saw January 6th, that happened. Like he literally said some words, galvanized people, and they went and committed treason against this country, right? And that should come with repercussions. I mean, even somebody like Alex Jones is like getting sued by those families, from the Sandy Hook massacre, who he was saying was made up, that they're all they're actors and things like that. Like at the very least, we should be organizing and suing the out of all these Fox News and all these people because of the things that they're putting out there, right? Like the messaging they're putting out there, it's reaching the people in the streets. And you see it when you see one of these Karens go off, and the talking points that they have are verbatim from these newscasters. So there is actual real world repercussions to it. And that's where I think the policing needs to happen.
Yeah, it's like blatant misinformation because they know people don't want to do the research themselves. So they'll be like, they'll just eat it up
Right.
I have an uncle who's like avid listener to like this really right wing, like, and I asked him like, yo, why are you listening to this? Like, you know, because it's just like, just like lie after lie after lie after lie. And I'm like, you know, it's easy to believe it too. It's not like, I think the Sandy Hook thing's a bit much. It's like, how could you believe this is a hoax? I get it. Maybe you don't want to admit that this happened because if you don't care about first graders and gun control, if you don't give a shit about that, then this country is just, we're hopeless when it comes to gun control. Like, so, I mean, I get it from the perspective of like a consumer. You don't want to believe something so heinous could happen, but believe it. It happened and we didn't do anything. Gun laws are still the same. The same.
Yeah.
We had a shooter come to El Paso, shoot 24 people. You know, tell me what's changed about the gun laws in Sandy Hook. And those are babies. So, you know, I'm like, yeah, a lot of things about this country need to be changed.
Right. And listen, it starts with conversations like this, and it's people hopefully hearing this, that it starts, you know, lighting a little bit of a fire underneath them about what they possibly could do. Right. That's all of us are doing our part, you know, hopefully, right. That's the goal with this.
Hopefully,
hopefully these kind of conversations inspire that. But listen, it's always incredible talking to you. I love hearing your point of view. And man, I just am so proud of these last few bodies of work that you've been putting out there, and really it feels so in line with, you know, your messaging of what you actually stand for in this life, and what you believe in and what you believe is right. And at the same time, you know, creating beautiful art along with it. So I have to commend you for that, and definitely recommend anybody to go check out all that you have going on. So if you want to push people to where they can hear more, where they can keep up with you on Instagram and all that kind of stuff, let them know.
My name's Floresita de Luna on all my Instagram handles, on all my social handles, and I'm on all platforms, on streaming platforms, so you can find me anywhere. Beautiful. Anything on the way before I get you out of here? Any new releases we should be looking out for? Yeah, we're gonna have the album release gonna come out in May 11th. I think that's the date we set. So yeah. Amazing. First body of work. Wow. Congratulations. That's amazing. I'm excited to hear it. And we'll have to have you on again at some point when that's out. Thank you so much for having me. Of course.
Man, big shout out to my guest this week, Flores, for hopping on. Make sure you check out her single, Exito, out everywhere right now. With that said, man, let's end on some positivity in the form of a positive quote. Now, man, I'm going to paraphrase this week's quote. It's from a book that I've been reading by Ryan Holiday, and it's called Ego is the Enemy. And loosely speaking, this quote basically says, we all have a point in life where we have to ask ourselves, do we want to do something, or do we want to be somebody? And I think that this is just so incredibly profound, something we should be asking ourselves, especially when you think about the conversation that Flores and I were having, right? You have to take a stand at some point, you know. Obviously, we're all fighting to better ourselves in this life, better the lives of our families in this life. But we also have to recognize that when we are in a position, be it big or small, that we can have some sort of an impact, we need to take a stand and utilize that opportunity that we've been given to make some sort of change. Everybody thinks that in order to enact great change, that you need to be some rich person in a position of power, or be privileged or connected, or all of the above. But look at what we saw with Amazon. These are two regular dudes who worked in the warehouse at Amazon that literally just, man, have probably one of the most powerful people in the world shaking in his boots right now because of what this could mean for the future of unions in a company like Amazon, who has notoriously been taking advantage of their employees. And let that be an inspiration for the change that us everyday people can have. And I brought up people in the media. Like, you need to be a part of those conversations when you see somebody saying something that is hurtful to your community, that is pushing some sort of narrative that just doesn't make sense, that you know is hypocritical. We all have to take a stand. We all have to do our part. Even if it's your next door neighbor who is saying something that just is the BS talking points from one of these, hate mongering pundits, you have to be there to check them. We all have to do our part. You don't have to be violent. You don't have to be angry with them, but you just have to remind people of the reality of what's going on in this world. And that's it. You do your part. And I think we all at times get obsessed with the idea of wanting to accumulate things like wealth and maybe even fame and stardom and status and all these different things, that we forget to realize that life is about purpose, and you have to choose a purpose to find true happiness. And that means taking the time to actually want to do something rather than trying to worry about being somebody that, you know, possesses some sort of status or that others look to as successful or cool. It's all about the work that you do, not about, you know, how the outside world chooses to view you. Just something to think about. Now, with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning into today's episode. I appreciate you, and I will catch you on the next show, and we'll dive into everything that is going on in this world. With that said, stay safe, and I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye.